Hey everybody, this is Ardaramus back with another Visual Basic game programming tutorial. Today we'll be focusing on creating a class. A class is essentially an object that we can reuse and create and destroy at runtime. We can also create simultaneous instances of that class that can be, essentially each one can have their own mind or intelligence. I'm going to show you how to create an array of these objects and display them on your form. So let's go ahead and just get started here. I'm going to start by creating a new project. And since we're going to be doing this pretty much from scratch, if you haven't followed my other tutorials, you should be able to still keep up. So let's, I'm just going to call it classes. And I'm going to take my form and just make it probably about 435 by, I'll just type it in here, 435 by 330. We don't want it too big. I've noticed in some of my other tutorials, people that have been trying to utilize my source code have been running into problems with it being really slow, and I think that's because we've just been using too much screen real estate in high resolution. So let's go ahead and just keep it kind of small here for this tutorial and see if things will work better for everybody. First thing we want to do is import our system.drawing library. That'll allow us to create our 2D graphics to our form. So I'm going to start out with graphics variables, and I'm going to in this one I'm going to be making my graphics object public, so all the other classes that we create can actually talk back to our main graphics object on our form. So I'm going to say public G as graphics. Yay for typing. Okay, and then I'm going to do my standard back buffer graphics object also as graphics. Just going to go ahead and set that to nothing by default. Then I'm going to do my back buffer image as a bitmap. Okay. Going to do my game state boolean. Actually, I'm going to make this one public too, so if we ever want to change it from, change the game state based upon the status of an object, we can do that. So we probably won't do that in this tutorial, but just looking ahead here. So I'm going to just set that to true. Next up, we will go to our form load, and the first thing we want to do here is show our game window. So I'm going to do a me.show form1, and then I'm going to do me.focus to grab focus to the window. When we create our drawing loop, if we haven't done this piece here, then when you run your application, your window will never pop up and you'll never see it. So next we'll initialize our graphics. I'm going to take G equals me dot create graphics, and then I'm going to create my back buffer image as a new bitmap, and I'm going to set a specific resolution this time instead of allowing it to stretch across the form, because if your form does get resized, or if you get tempted to resize it manually in high resolution mode, it will kill your performance. So because GDI just isn't very efficient. So I'm just going to set it to 420 by 288, and then I'm probably going to just be drawing across, probably at 380 across, and then 288 down, multiples of 32. So I'm going to come down here, and we'll go ahead and build the foundation of our game loop. So I'm going to do a private sub G loop, as I like to call it. We'll say do while is running equals true. Okay, so as long as our game state is in the running status, our game loop will continue to cycle. Then we will have our keep alive code, application .do events. Alright, so now we're ready to throw in our graphics. So we'll have a draw part of our loop, and then we'll have some cleanup code at the end of the loop to dispose of any objects later on. I'm not going to enter these yet because we haven't created a sub for our graphics. So we'll drop down here now and create our drawing. I'm not going to be using actual tiles in my tile map this time, just to keep it kind of fast. I'll just be creating some fakey looking green grass with green rectangles. So what we will be drawing is some little critters, some sprites to the screen. So let's see here. I'm going to have my private sub draw for my drawing routine. I'm going to draw my fakey looking grass using my standard tile mapping routine for x equals 0 to 9. Now keep in mind, if you guys are having some major slowdowns, if you're drawing 0 to a really high number here times your tile size, that's your overall game resolution. And if it's too high, GDI is really going to choke and drag your performance down. So if your ticks are really slow, you might try bringing this down. Since I'm going to be using 32 pixel tiles, it's going to essentially be 0 times 32 to 9 times 32. I think that brings us to like 380 or something. So next up, I'm going to do for y equals 0 to 8. And here I'm just going to tell my graphics object to fill some rectangles. We're going to do x coordinate times 32, y, whoops, okay, I wasn't paying attention here. I'm just going to do a green brush. Now I'm going to do my rectangle coordinates here. I'm going to do x times 32, y times 32, so it'll increment by 32 in its position, and then it will draw 32 by 32 tiles. Okay? So that should essentially just create a big green grassy field for us. Now let's see, I'm going to do my standard back buffer thing. That's going to be G equals graphics.fromImage, and that image will be our back buffer. And then we'll take our back buffer graphics and set it to the form graphics, and then we will take our back buffer and draw image our back buffer, and we are going to draw it to the top leftmost portion of the screen, so x0, y0. And last but not least, we will clear our graphics buffer and rinse and repeat. So I like to just use wheat as a sort of neutral color for my background. Alright, so we should be able to actually run this, but we haven't included our draw routine. I'm just going to make sure everything's popping up okay here. And there it is. So let's go ahead and throw in our draw to our game loop. Okay. And then we will kick off our game loop by putting it in our form load. Let's go ahead and run that. Hey, okay, so it looks like everything's drawing nicely here. Now you can see if I stretch out my screen, because we kind of hard-coded the resolution on that, it will not stretch. And that's kind of what we want here in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And then we are going to create another form. So I'm going to right-click in my Solution Explorer on my project, and I'm going to add a new form, Windows Form. And this is for my my graphics. So I'm just going to call this one GFX, and that's how we will refer to it. This form will never show. We won't actually see it when our game is running, so it doesn't really matter how big you make it. I'm going to go ahead and add a picture box to this one to store our sprites. So I'm going to take that guy right there. I'm going to click on the image. I'm going to import, and I'm going to take my go to my folder here and my class design. And there's my sprites. So I've got 4 little sprites in a palette here that we're going to use. Yes, I created them myself. They're kind of ridiculous, but they were fun. Alright, and I'm going to name this, click on your picture box and name it PB Sprites. So picture box sprites for future reference. Alright, so now that we've got that, we will be ready to go ahead and add our first class. And to do this, we will right-click again in our Solution Explorer on our project, and we will add a new class. I'm going to call this class Critter, because I'm going to be adding critters. There's Critter. Okay, now when it comes to creating classes, you want to just keep in mind that a class is really no different than your form class or your picture boxes or any other object in Visual Basic. So the cool thing about these is that they're going to have their own properties, they're going to have their own variables and events, all sorts of stuff like that, that are, essentially when you created all those all those sub-objects, say timers and things like that, are created with it, and then when it's destroyed, they're also destroyed with it. So this allows you to kind of create a whole bunch of these without, and destroy them without, stacking them up and, flooding your memory out over the course of your game. So, let's see where to begin. We're going to start with the variables just like we do in our main form class. So I'm going to dim my sprite rectangle as a variable. Keep in mind also that you can also set these, just like in our other one, you can set these to public or private. If you dim it like this, it's just going to be private. It'll only be available within the class. If you put public, you can actually change these variables from your main form. You'll also be able to set properties and things like that to public or read-only, and you'll see that as we go here. So I'm going to create my sprite rectangle as a rectangle, and then I'm going to mistype dim and then create my sprite bitmap source. That's going to be as a bitmap, and I'm going to go ahead and just throw in move speed, even though we probably won't rely on it. It's just so I don't have to, if I want to change certain variables, I can change it across the board here. So I'm going to just do that as an integer. I'm going to just set it to 1. Leave myself a no, don't change, because I'm actually going to be relying on the timer for our movement speed. And last but not least, for our sprite, I'm going to create our sprite type. Okay, and this is going to manage what kind of object we create, because we don't want to have to create a new class for every different creature that we want to show, right? Why not just use the same class to display all the creatures, whether it's the snake or any of these other guys. So I'm going to say sprite type as integer, and I'm just going to set a default value of 0, even though that will be changed as we create the critters. So next up, we'll manage the critter position, where it's going to show up on the form. I'm going to set this to public so we can change it whenever we want, or update it from our form, or access the value. Some of these values you will want to have access to on the other side. So I'm going to set it to public. I'm just going to say critter x as integer equals 0. Again, we'll change that value on the fly. And also public critter y as integer. Now our timers. I'm only going to be adding 1 timer to these objects. You may, depending on the type of movement you want on your NPCs or critters or monsters, whatever you're creating, you may actually need more than 1 timer to manage all of the attributes. In this case, I'm just going to be adding 1 timer to manage. I'm not sure how it will affect performance if we create a whole bunch of timers, since these will be duplicated on your form. So if you have 3 timers, every time you create another critter or NPC, it's going to double those. So I'm just going to create a standard update timer, okay, to adjust the movement, since I'm going to try to keep this simple. Otherwise we're going to be having a really long tutorial. So I'm going to start out with timer speed as integer. And you may or may not want this to be public, depending on whether you want to be able to adjust your movement speed from the form. That's a possibility. Or if you have, like a haste spell and you want to make your character run faster, things like that, or the monster. Just ideas for the future. Dim ticks, if you want to track the ticks of your counter. I probably won't be using this one again, but you will most likely end up needing something like this in the future. So I'm just going to add it just as a reference. The next one, this is where we create our actual timer object. Okay, so I'm going to dim with events, because we want to track the events of this timer object, and I'm going to call it TMR update. So that's the name of my timer, as a new system.timers.timer. Okay, and I'm going to throw a variable, my timer speed, to maintain the interval. Okay, so and then we're going to give it a few parameters to start with. So I'm going to use with, put up your little curly brace there, the enabled property equals true. That means that when our object is created, when our critter class is called, this timer automatically gets created with these values. You don't have to have this enabled. You could have it, just laying dormant until you want it to be called. That's all up to you. Alright, so that's all of our variables. Now we're going to add a couple of properties. First property I'm going to create will be a public property. Actually, it might be the only one I create here too, just to keep things simple. Critter type. Okay. And what we're going to do with this is simply set the value of this variable, so it allows a user input for this to change our sprite type and fetch the proper rectangle on our graphic here for the critter we want. So just going to hit get and enter, and that'll pre-populate the get and set values. So to get it, what we will do is simply return sprite type. Alright, so if you ask it from the form, you know, what type of sprite it is for some reason, it'll tell you there. To set it, I'm going to do sprite type equals value. So whatever the user or application in your form here tells it to get is what it'll get. We're going to add one more. Going to add a sub here next to actually choose that rectangle. So this is going to be a public sub, and I'm going to call it sprite source. Okay. And in here we're going to do excuse me, a select case sprite type. So it's going to evaluate this variable here based upon what was selected. We'll say case 0. First one's going to be our snake graphic. Case 1, I'm going to call him Marlac. Yes, that's very nifty. Case 2, call the other guy Drazik. Case 3, our fun little butterfly. I don't know why I felt compelled to make a butterfly. So here we're going to set our sprite rectangle to new rectangle, and we want to grab the snake's coordinates here, so that's going to be 0, 0 to 32. So we'll just start at 0 x and 0 y. The width is 32, the height is 32. Piece of cake. Alright, we'll just go ahead and copy and paste this chunk here. And one more. Now, here's something I did on purpose here, just so I can show you. You don't have to have all the same sprite size. You can have different sizes here. It's all up to you. My butterfly is actually just a 16 by 16, so just change the size of it right there. So let's look at Marlac here. He's going to be x32, y0. So we'll do 32 and 0. And Drazik is going to be 64, x and 0, y. Okay, now that we have our subset here, let's make it like a little event. So when excuse me, when the critter type is selected from the form, it automatically selects dynamically the right tile here based upon whatever that was. So as soon as your critter's created, any critter type is chosen, it automatically launches the sprite source and populates the sprite rectangle. So if, you know, critter type 1 was chosen, it grabs the right graphic for it. Next up, we have to tell it to draw our critter to the form as we desire. So I'm going to do a public sub and I'm going to call it draw critter with no parameters. I've noticed some of you are using Visual Basic 2008, and for some reason I think that one, when you terminate your form, it continues to attempt to draw the objects that are on it, and so you may have to try a try catch here. I'm just going to leave mine out for now, but that should keep it from failing on you when you close your form. I'm just going to say Sprite BMP equals our graphics form PB Sprites dot image. Okay, so we're setting this picture box image to the bitmap, and then we're going to select a piece of it just like we do when we tile map. So here I'm going to take Sprite BMP dot make transparent color, yay, I can type, dot fuchsia. Okay, and if you remember from the other tutorials, this is how we set our transparency, and I always use the bright fuchsia background. I know some of you have had a little bit of trouble finding that. I do have another tutorial that demonstrates how to find that color for your masks. So we've made that an invisible color, and now we just need to force the form to draw it when it's told to. So say form1.g. Now remember here, just to recall, we set this graphics object as public, so we can reference it from our class. So form1.g dot draw image whoops, I meant to grab my sprite. Sprite BMP critter x is going to be where it draws it on the x coordinate. Critter y, same for the y coordinate. And the one that this is going to be our source rectangle, so we're going to select sprite rect, and the graphics unit will be pixels. And now when it's told to, it should draw it properly to the form. And then next up, we have to create a command, another sub, to move our critter. So I'm going to say public sub move critter, and you're probably going to want to supply a direction, even though in this tutorial I'm only going to be moving him in one direction continuously. This will allow you to select the direction that you want to move. So I'm just going to set that as a short, since we really only have 4 possible values here, 4 likely values. Not to say that you have to confine yours to that, but I'm going to say, whoops, need a select case here again, and we're going to select the direction, and we'll say case 0, move up, case 1, move down, case 2, move left, case 3, move right. I'm just going to move them down. I'm going to have all my sprites moving in a downward direction. So I'm just going to say critter y plus equals move speed, which we've set to 1 up here. Okay, so if I want to change all these for some reason, I can just change it in one place up here, and then I don't have to go through here and manipulate these individually. That's why I did that. In most NPC classes, monsters, you know, you're gonna have some sort of artificial intelligence eventually built in, or you know, you're gonna want to move specifically in certain directions, things like that. Anytime that you want to update your objects, you're probably going to want to have something like this. Even though I'm not going to use it, I'm going to just kind of outline it here. Just do an update. You know, if you want to pass it parameters, you can do that too. So this would just update at a predefined increment, possibly on another timer or something like that, or on the main form's clock. Whatever you want to do there. So we'll just update the critter AI and stuff. For now, we're just going to be using the move critter to actually move our little guy. If you're moving up, I guess we can go ahead and populate these even though we're not going to use them. You know, you remember from the other tutorials in the character movement, you just increment or decrement the x and y values. So moving left and right is going to be moving on the x-axis. So you have critter y, and that's going to be a minus. Or, I'm sorry. I'm always tired after lunch. Okay, so moving right is going to increment x. Moving left is going to decrement. Let's go ahead and get into our timer event. We have to set this to keep track of what our timer is doing. Okay, and we're going to use this timer to move the critter downward. I am going to make this a private sub, and it's going to be TMR update underscore tick, and here we're going to set it up just like any other form event. We're going to have our by val as sender, and that's going to be an object, and then we are going to have by val e as system.timers.elapsed event args. Okay, so it's going to keep track of this for us, and then it's going to handle TMR update and dot elapsed. Okay, so you can see here that it's monitoring this elapsed event. So every 10 milliseconds it's going to tick, and it will recognize it here. Alright, so what we're going to do is use that to move our critter in a particular direction. In this case, I'm going to be moving him 1 or down. And that's really all there is to creating the class itself. So what we're going to want to do next is monitor these created objects. We're going to want to create some first off, and then we're going to monitor and create more and destroy them as we see fit. So I'm going to go ahead and save my project here, and I'm going to save that in my tutorial folder and class design. Alright, let's go ahead and create a test critter just to test out our class. I'm going to come up here in my form variables, and I'm going to create a new one for test critter. I'm going to dim my critter as a critter, and you'll see it listed there in your class objects. So you come down here, we have to give it some values. So I'm going to say init test critter, and I'll say my critter equals new critter, and then I will say my critter dot critter type equals 1. Alright, so if this works properly when we draw it, looking back at our class here, we've chosen a critter type of 1, which is going to be our marlac. So I will go down to my drawing now. We're going to want to put this on the second layer, so it'll be after our tile draw. just draw critters, and we can say my critter dot draw critter. Okay, so our drawing routine is going to be constantly executing this code right here. So if that works, then what we should get is a new critter with a timer enabled that moves our critter in a downward direction. So let's go ahead and run this for fun. Hey, and there it goes. And he just keeps going forever in a downward direction. Alright, so we know that our class is functioning properly. I'm going to go ahead and remove this code because just having one critter is not much fun. And we're going to want to create an array of critters and different kinds of critters. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. And what we're going to do is create a new sub to create new critters, and then we're going to add them to an array. So let's get started with that next. I'm going to come down here under the game state, and I'm going to call this object arrays. I'm going to dim AR critters, and I'm going to go ahead and supply a maximum value of instances for this class to be created. Okay, so I'm going to create an array of 10 possible critters. So say up to 10 critters. Now you can add whatever number you want here. If you only want it to create 3 critters max on your screen at a time, then you could do something like that. You could do 255. Now what you have to be careful of is the more objects you create. Remember, every single time you create one of these objects, you're going to create all of that object's timers and other goodies that you've added to its class. So just keep that in mind. You may end up bogging your machine down if you put too many on the screen at once. I'm going to go ahead and max it out at 10. I know that this machine can take more than that, but we may play with that some more later on. Anyway, this is our array, and we can drop new critters into that. They can all have different values, and they all have their own timers. So what we're going to do next is add a sub to create those critters and add them to our array. Okay, so what I'm going to do is do a private sub. I'm going to call it create critter, and because we want to supply some initial values, we're going to throw in some parameters here. I'm going to start with by val type as an integer, so we can tell it what type of critter we want, and we want it to have some starting coordinates. Okay, we don't want them all popping up in the exact same spot every time. So I'll say start x as an integer, and likewise I will do the by val start y as integer, and then I will create the sub. So what we'll do is what we did just a moment ago, except for we're going to contain it all in this capsule. We're going to say dim my critter as a critter equals new critter. And then we'll say with our critter, supply it some defaults. Okay, whoops, sorry, I didn't want to call the class name, I want to call my created class my critter. So some of the parameters we'll want to fill are critter type, and we're going to set that to our type parameter, so our sub automatically gives it a type. And critter x will equal start x, and critter y equals start y. And that's really all we have to supply it here. And now that it's been created, we need to drop it into our array. So what we're going to do is loop through the possible values in that array and look for an open spot. So if it doesn't find one, it won't add a new one to the array. If it does find a new open spot, it will add a new critter to the array. So we'll say for x equals 0 to array critters dot count -1, and we always put a -1 on there because this is 0 based. Since 0 is a value, then 34 is actually 35, right? If you don't supply that 1, you'll go out of the bounds of the array, and of course things crash when that happens, so don't forget that. So what we'll do is we'll say if is nothing, meaning that if there's pretty much a null value in any of these slots, then we'll use that first slot. Okay, so we'll go to array critters, and we're going to use x as our index, and we'll say if whatever index it finds the first null value, I better put in my ending parenthesis there, or paren. Wherever it finds the first null value is where it will try to add a new critter. So I'll say array critters x index equals my critter. Okay? So we've created the critter. We loop through the array looking for an available slot, and when it finds one, it creates it. If it does not find one, it skips out. After we do this, I'm going to tell it to exit the sub so it doesn't keep looking. It just bails out of create critter as soon as it finds and fills a spot. Okay, let's see. So we need to get used to looking at this guy. We're going to use that a lot. The next place we're going to put this is in our draw routine. Okay, since we're not just drawing a single critter, we have to know how many critters exist, and then we can draw them. So we can cycle through. I'll say for x equals 0 to array critter dot count -1, and then again we'll say we're actually going to reverse this time. We'll say if is nothing array critter at x index equals false, meaning that there is a value. If in fact there is a value, then we will draw. Then we'll call that index and tell it to draw critter. Okay? Alright. So now we just need to create a critter to test this and drop him in the array. So I'm going to come up here and say create a critter. I want him to be a type 2, and I want him to start at 50 x and 0 y, so somewhere up at the top of the form there. So our form's going to load, critter's going to be created, it's going to be dropped into the array, and it's going to search the array during the draw routine to see if there are any critters in the array, and if there are, it's going to draw them. So let's go ahead and run that. Hey, look at that. He is working wonderfully. So let's make this a little more fun here. Let's add a mouse event to generate random critters at random coordinates. What I'm going to do is click in my load event here, and then I'm going to find my mouse down Alright, where are you at? There you go. Okay, so let's, whenever the mouse is clicked, I'm going to dim R&D as a new random, and then I'm going to call create critter rnd.next, and my critter types are from 0 to 3, so I'm going to say 0 to 4, because if you remember in my random numbers video, the last number that you choose never actually lands. I don't know why that is, but it'll only go from 0 to 3 if we do this. So now we have to specify a starting position. We're only going to randomize the X. I want them all to start at the top of the screen, but in a random location at the top. So I'm just going to do another random.next here. And this time I'm going to say anywhere between 0 and 300. So anywhere at the top of the screen, and Y is always going to be 0 because I want it to start at the top. So when we click our mouse, it should add more critters to the array. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to run it, and we have 1, and now I'm clicking my mouse. It looks like our butterfly is not happy. I probably grabbed the wrong coordinates for him. Let me go back here. Oh, I forgot to change his Y coordinate. That is going to be 32. X0 and Y32. I was grabbing a chunk of another tile there. And try this again. Yay, now we have butterflies. Now you'll notice that once I hit 10, no more can be created, and then they just sort of keep going off into eternity. So what we need now is a way to destroy them after they reach a certain spot. We don't want them to go forever. Once they've kind of left our specified area, they should just disappear and release those resources back into the memory and processor. So we're going to go ahead and create another sub, and we're going to call this one destroy critter. So I'm going to do private sub destroy critter, and we want it to be at a specific index, so we're going to create a parameter called index, so we only destroy the critter that we want to destroy and not just all the critters. And this is going to be as an integer. So we're going to say if is nothing index, okay, equals false, meaning that there is something at that index value, then kill it. AR critter, whoops, at index, since I'm not looping through X here like it was before, equals nothing, okay? Alright. So now we have to decide where and when we want to evaluate the critter's life. We will go ahead and do that up in our game loop, okay? So we created that little cleanup area. That's a good time to evaluate and say, hey, do we want to keep this critter or not? And once again, we're going to loop through our critter array for x equals 0 to array critters. Sorry, I keep saying critters. Dot count -1, and we'll look at all the values again that are not already empty. So we'll say if is nothing our critter at index x equals false, then destroy that critter. Actually, we don't want to just destroy all the critters, so we need one more thing to check here. We'll say remove well-traveled critters. Okay, So only if they meet a certain condition here, and that condition will be if array critter x dot critter y, if its y coordinate is greater than 200, meaning it's moved down 200 pixels, then it's traveled quite long enough, and we will destroy it. Destroy critter x. Okay, so we loop through the array, look for records, look for places where there's critters, and check the y value, and if the y value is 200, then it's gone far enough, and so we will destroy that index. Let's go ahead and just run this and see if it works on our default critter there. Boom! See him just vanish there? So let's start clicking madly here. Get some random critters. Watch them also vanish. Good. And now you'll notice another thing. Because we're destroying them when we're done with them, I can keep clicking. Now there can only be 10 on the screen at once because that's the maximum in our array, but those slots are freed up as soon as they vanish. So I can just keep creating them forever. Again, we could bump this critter value up to 25, and that's a lot of objects to create. But it looks like it's handling it okay. You can click them madly and it's hard to catch up with them. Something you could do, you could actually turn this into a little game. If you wanted to add bounding boxes to your class, then you could actually track a character at the bottom of the screen. You could, put him down there and move him back and forth and try to dodge all the critters, and instead of having them created on mouse clicks, you could have them created on a timer value, and then as as it gets more difficult, just have that timer value sped up and start creating them like crazy and trying to dodge them. Just an idea. Anyway, I hope that this has been helpful for you. I'm sorry that this was such a long video. I mean, there's just an infinite number of things that you could do with these classes, and they get pretty complex. So this should be a good start for you, and you should be able to take these and eventually make them move in random directions if you want, or you can make them use the timer to chase the character. All sorts of things you can do there. So anyway, I wish you all well and good luck on your projects as usual. Take care. Bye-bye.